Hey Pokemon fans, Tamashii here. Not too long ago I made a video of my top 10 favorite Pokemon. And of course immediately everyone wanted to know what the opposite was. For some reason, out of 649 and counting Pokemon, everyone always wants to know what the ugliest, least popular, and worst of the bunch are. And to be honest, I had an extremely hard time coming up with any. I really like pretty much every Pokemon there is, so it was really difficult to come up with 10 that were my least favorite. So keep in mind, I don't necessarily dislike these Pokemon, but these are the ones that I like the least out of all the Pokemon out there. So without further ado, let's start the countdown. Number 10, Azurill. This applies only to specific Azurill, particularly the Azurill in the Gen 5 games. They're common, and they're available early on. What's so bad about them? That heartbreaking face they make. I don't want to hurt you. Stop looking at me like that. Please don't be so scared and sad. I'm sorry. Number 9, Cubone. Cubone is a fairly popular Pokemon because it has a rather tragic backstory. In Red and Blue, its mother was killed by Team Rocket, and nearly every Pokédex entry about it since then states the skull it wears on its head is that of its dead mother, or that its mother is dead or missing. But keep in mind, now that Pokemon breeding has been a staple of the series for 4 generations, that you can breed Cubone easily. How can its mother be dead if I still have her in my party? You'd think they'd correct this, but no. Right up till Black and White 2, the Pokédex still insists that it's crying for its dead mother. Cubone, your mom isn't dead. She's right here. You can stop crying now. Cubone made my least favorite list simply because it doesn't even make sense within the Pokemon universe anymore. If its mom isn't dead, then whose skull is it wearing on its head? How is it born with the skull if it's not something that's part of Cubone's anatomy? So many questions left unanswered. Number 8, Venusaur. What? How could you dislike Venusaur? The final evolved form of one of the original starter Pokemon. But before you freak out too much, I'm not talking about every Venusaur out there. No, I only dislike the Venusaur from the Pokemon Stadium, Coliseum, and Battle Revolution games. Every time it attacks, its eyes become super bloodshot, and I find that extremely hard to look at without my own eyes watering. Every time I use a Venusaur in those games, I have to shut my eyes or look away every time it attacks. It's just gross, and it makes me really uncomfortable. Get some eye drops or something, dude. Jeez. Number 7, Yanmega. Yanma is an awesome Pokemon. It captures a dragonfly's best qualities perfectly, with a sleek, cool design and rarity in the wild. When it finally got an evolution in 4th gen, this was Game Freak's perfect opportunity to do something with the dragonfly concept and make it the first ever dragon bug type combo. But instead it was stuck as yet another bug flying type, as if we didn't have enough of those already. I wish a Pokemon as cool as Yanma got some better treatment with its evolution, but every time I look at Yanmega, I only see a missed opportunity. Number 6, Ferrothorn. I tried really hard not to put any Pokemon on this list for only aesthetic reasons, but at the end of the day, I really just don't like how this Pokemon looks. And it's not its design really. There's nothing too terribly offensive about a spiky metal blob with green tentacles, but its color scheme. I just find that this particular combination of gray, green, and a little yellow is just kinda unappealing. And unfortunately, its shiny form isn't much better. Normally when I hear other people criticize Pokemon based on looks, I ask, well, what would you do to improve it? So just to be fair, I tried as hard as I could to find another in-game palette that worked better with Ferrothorn's design. And I came up with nothing that made sense as a grass steel type. I guess they really didn't have too many choices when you're making a grass steel type and still make it look like both types. So while I don't like the design, I will concede that there isn't any logical way to improve it either. Number 5, Rapidash. This is on my list more because I'm not crazy about actual real life horses and anything to do with the Pokemon itself. But I have to be honest and say that I really just don't like using Ponyta or Rapidash to this day because of it. I was never terribly fond of horses. I actually took care of a horse at summer camp for a couple weeks, and the pen was always really smelly, the horses drooled and peed and pooped everywhere, and they were overall kind of gross and not fun to be around. One time when I was visiting my cousin's farm though, she let me ride one of her horses, and it hated me. It did anything it could to get me off of it, and long story short, I ended up breaking my wrist. I've been scared of horses ever since, and since I wasn't wild about them in the first place, my opinion of them is even worse now. So when it comes to horse Pokemon, of course they're not going to be among my favorites. Number 4, Sunflora. To explain this one, I'll need to tell you another story. The 3rd generation games are extremely strict about letting you trade between them before you beat each game. I like to do randomized playthroughs of Pokemon games with random teams, which often means I need to trade with myself for Pokemon you can't find in that regional Pokédex. Not too long ago, I wanted to start such a playthrough on my Emerald version, which does not allow you to trade with other games before you beat the game and get the national dex, which was a problem for me with one of my randomly generated Pokemon being a Dratini. I recently got a GBA action replay, so I figured I'd just use a code to catch a Dratini to start the game with. But for some reason, every single action replay encounter code I tried caused the Sunflora to appear instead. Ultimately, I got extremely frustrated, mostly because I felt like I shouldn't have to cheat just to play through Emerald with a Dratini, when I had one I could have traded to myself from Fire Red legitimately. It's a stupid restriction that says you can't trade with other games until you get the national dex that was causing me all this trouble, and I didn't see why Game Freak wouldn't just let me play through the game my own way instead of their way. Eventually, I did manage to get get a Dratini, but it was way more trouble than it should have been. I liked Sunflora before, but now to me, every Sunflora just reminds me of those troll flora. Sunflora's face even looks kind of like a troll face. Number 3. Hitmonchan. Again, this requires a story. Believe it or not, even my sister once was in on the Pokemon craze. One day when my dad picked us up for the weekend, we stopped at a store and got a couple packs of Pokemon cards. One for me, one for my sister. She didn't get anything too cool in her pack, but I got a holo foil Hitmonchan. I was really excited until she demanded that I give it to her. She didn't ask me to treat it to her, she didn't offer me anything in return, she just demanded it. When I said no, she beat me up and stole it from me, bending the card in the process. I actually now have the Hitmonchan back, but it's bittersweet. On the one hand, I feel like having it is a small victory in some ways, but in others all it does is remind me of how awful it was growing up with her. Every time I see a Hitmonchan now, I'm reminded of that incident, so I avoid it whenever possible. Number 2. Jinx. Jinx has been the subject of controversy for a long time, and for good reason. To be clear, what Jinx design is based off of has never been mentioned or confirmed by anyone at Game Freak, so there's no way of knowing what their intent was. There are many interpretations of Jinx, some claiming she's based on Japanese street fashion Ganguro, which features an extremely dark pink tan, or the Yama Uba from Japanese folklore. Since Jinx's origins are so disputed, of course many people argue that Jinx's appearance isn't meant to be racist to anyone. However, it's undeniable that it bears a striking resemblance to illustrations from a Japanese republishing of the children's book called Little Black Sambo. The book was originally written in 1899 and was meant to portray a little Indian boy as the title character, but was re-illustrated many times to feature an African protagonist instead. Many people consider the book racist because it portrays Sambo as a stereotype, and eventually led to the word Sambo itself becoming a racial slur. However, the book Little Black Sambo was extremely popular in Japan, where the stereotype hadn't been established, and as a result the illustrations became iconic. Sambo's face was featured on dolls, cell phone straps, buttons, and much more. Many characters from various animes, such as Popo from Dragon Ball Z, also strongly resemble Sambo. It's not hard to see the similarities between Sambo's face and Jinx's, which is why so many people consider Jinx herself to be racist, especially considering she has many other exaggerated and possibly stereotypical traits. Suppose just for a moment though, that the people who argue that she was never intended to be interpreted that way were correct. Satoshi Tajiri has stated that they had over 300 designs for Gen 1, and picked only their favorites to make it into the game. Why then did Jinx end up among them? Did they not consider that Jinx's face resembles Sambo? Did they not see how this could have negative connotations? If it is just a coincidence that Jinx resembles a famously racist character, then Game Freak was extremely careless by including her, and ought to have been more sensitive. In fact, this is such a huge blunder on their part that they actually changed Jinx's face color from black to purple in localized versions of the game's anime and trading cards up until Gen 3, where Jinx's official face color changed to purple worldwide. I'm not saying that I think Jinx is racist or that it was Game Freak's intention for her to come off that way, but if there's any chance that her inclusion made someone else feel like they weren't welcome to play Pokemon, or that the Pokemon world thought of them as a stereotype, it makes me sad to think that anyone wasn't able to have the positive experience I did playing Pokemon. And my number 1 least favorite Pokemon is Lopunny. I want to say before I explain this one that my reasons for disliking Lopunny are due to my own personal biases, so nothing I'm about to say applies to anyone else but myself, which should be a given considering this is my own personal least favorites list. When I first saw Lopunny, my immediate thought was this: I know there are people out there that find Pokemon attractive, and it's not like Lopunny is the only Pokemon out there that has humanoid or even sexualized features. However, the fact that this Pokemon, which resembles a rabbit, has what I thought were such overtly sexualized features that it just kind of simultaneously creeps me out and pisses me off. Something about the shape of its lower body, coupled with the way its arms are tucked into its upper body, hiding its chest, just looks a bit too much like a sexualized female body for me to be comfortable with. Now keep in mind, in Battle Revolution, Lopunny's chest is actually completely flat and featureless. It's just its arms and the sprite artwork that resemble breasts, and its gender in the game is not exclusively female, meaning there can be male Lopunnies. So really, Lopunny wouldn't even bother me at all if it weren't for the sprite artwork in the main series games putting in that weird pose with its arms pressed up to its chest and its butt sticking out. Something about its lower body though, the fact that it's a rabbit, a creature iconically linked to sexual objectification thanks to Playboy, and the fact that its abilities are cute, charm, klutz, or limber, making it a walking trope, still rubs me the wrong way. Pokemon has always been rather progressive, at least in the main series games alone, when it came to the representation of women in video games. Again, I'm not saying that anyone at Game Freak intended for Lopunny to be sexist or even resemble a sexualized female body, and I'm not saying that anyone else feels this way about it. I fully admit that these are my own biases talking. This is just my personal interpretation of its design and how it makes me feel, and why it's my personal least favorite Pokemon. And that concludes my list from my top 10 least favorite Pokemon. If I listed any of your favorites, remember that I don't actually actively dislike most of these Pokemon. They just happen to be the ones I like the least. Let me know what your least favorite Pokemon are in the comments. Thank you for watching, and stick around for more Pokemon videos. See ya!